Evening. Hi everyone, my name is Suda Srinivasan. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Growth at Dome9 Security. Welcome to this webinar on key considerations in getting started securely on AWS. I am Suda. I'll be your host for this webcast, and with me I have two guests. Reza Salari. Reza Salari is the Cloud Architecture Lead at Pacific Life. He's the manager of the Information Security and Telemetry Group for his division, and he heads the IT transformation efforts across Pacific Life. Reza has over 14 years of experience securing networks in private companies as well as Department of Defense customers. Also, we have Scott Ward, who is a solutions architect at AWS with the partner ecosystem. Scott's been with Amazon since 2001 and has had a front row seat to the birth of the public cloud, really. So, really great guests to talk about the topic that we have on hand today, which is how do you get started securely on AWS? And this is an important topic because for many customers, security still remains the top barrier to broader public cloud adoption. So we have Scott, who is our technical expert. He's been working with customers since the early days of AWS, and he's going to talk about some of the best practices that he shares with customers when they talk about deploying on AWS. And Reza has just gone through this exercise of moving from the data center to the public cloud. So he's going to bring that perspective of actually having deployed in the cloud and talk about what his journey looks like. Okay, Scott, Reza, welcome to the session. So the format for this session is a virtual chat rather than just going through a set of slides. What we're going to do is we're going to kick it off with a few questions, and we're going to have a conversation about different issues around cloud adoption. We definitely want to open it up to questions from you. So if you have any questions, open up the questions window in GoToWebinar and type the questions in, and we will get to them. We'll make sure that we address them during our conversation. Okay, so let's get started. Scott, let's start with some fundamentals. So consider that an organization is going from the data center to the public cloud. They have a fairly mature security operation in their data center footprint. Okay, and now they're getting ready to move one or two workloads to AWS. What should the planning process look like from a security perspective? Like, what are the things that they need to be aware of, which is different between their data center environment and AWS from security perspective?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things that I would probably point out that would allow a team to get started with some basics. I think first one, you probably look at the region that you want to run in, understanding if there's any sort of compliance requirements that you have to fulfill right off the bat of where your data needs to be stored or located. I'd take a look at that and kind of figure out where in the world you need to start running. I'd also maybe look to figure out what you think your account strategy is going to look like. How are you going to segment your workloads, by account? Are you going to have a different account per organization within your company? Or are you going to have a different account for your dev and your test and your prod workloads? Having at least a high-level understanding of that early on, so you know what your kind of security layout's going to look like as far as how much you're going to have to protect is really important, and how you're going to enforce protection across all of those different accounts. And then I really think it starts diving down into identity and access management, and figuring out how are you actually going to allow people to access the AWS account as well as things. And by things, I mean, different applications or pieces of code that need to interact with the AWS APIs. That AWS is basically, your entire data center now virtualized, and IAM is the cornerstone that's going to allow you to control who can access and do what against your account. So understanding what you're going to do with IAM and who you're going to let in and what access you're going to give them early on is really important. The next thing I do right after that is go and turn on CloudTrail. So CloudTrail is your service that gives you an audit of every API call made against your AWS account, and you can do that against one account or all accounts. Turn that thing on right away when you open your account, so that you're immediately at least capturing all this information, so you have the ability to actually go in and audit it or use it for an operational purpose, and understand what has happened or identify when somebody has done something that's going to be kind of your source of truth of what's going on. And we have companies that are using that for compliance reasons as well, to say, look, we can show you that nobody has been able to access this service who's outside of this particular group because we have the audit trail to back it up. So CloudTrail is something you want to turn on and invest in very early on. And kind of building on that, I think the other thing that security teams really need to think about is just kind of understanding that the kind of information the AWS platform puts off. Outside of CloudTrail, there's several other services, whether it be VPC flow logs or the load balancers that put off a tremendous amount of log data. So just understanding that you have the ability to get at this other data and capture it, and there are different ways to analyze that, and also understand that because it's all API based, you have a tremendous opportunity to automate a lot of things. So start thinking about that as part of your strategy. It'll take time to build that up, but just at least establish an understanding of what's available to you so you know what your plan's going to look like. After that, I'd probably start thinking about your network topology on AWS. You're going to go, what's going to be public, what's going to be private, what are you going to allow to talk to each other? Are you going to have any sort of a hybrid strategy, connecting your on-premise and your AWS resources? Next, I'd think about what partner solutions are out there to help you with some of the things. There's, as I said, the AWS platform puts off a tremendous amount of data. And it may not be in a company's core competency to actually be able to ingest and make sense of all that data quickly and in a way that helps them. And so we've got a lot of partner solutions out there, such as Dome9, that can kind of help you make sense of and be able to manage the data that platform's putting off to allow you to implement the security profile that you want. I think the final thing I'd really kind of point out is just tagging. Find some sort of a tagging strategy that allows you to define what all your resources you're using in AWS are for, what their purpose is, so that you can track them and be able to build profiles around those particular resources.
Got it. That is definitely a very nice step-by-step process. So you talk about understanding your footprint, where you're going to deploy things, which regions, and so on, and then making sure that you understand what your infrastructure footprint is going to look like, IAM, and then you talk about auditing and logging, right? Turning on CloudTrail, using VPC flow logs and any other logging information, making sure that you're using automation in your security because you have APIs, and security is really something you want always on. So automation, talked about network topology, partner solutions, and finally just tagging and the security operations, right? This is really one area where we hear a lot of challenges when it comes to thinking about security. That's all great points. Now, is there some framework or set of principles, like when you're thinking about security in the cloud, that you share with customers? Like, here's how, there's of course these 7 steps of different aspects of security, but what are the principles that you should keep in mind when you're thinking about security in the cloud?
Yeah, I think the first key difference is that you're not protecting your entire data center anymore, and this is a perfect slide for that, is that you are now dealing with what we call a shared responsibility model, where you as a customer have some responsibility and AWS has some responsibility. So AWS is really going to be taking care of the bottom part of this slide, where we own the responsibility for security of the cloud. So the physical infrastructure that supports the regions and the availability zones and the edge locations you would be using around the world, as well as kind of those foundational services, that are comprised of compute, storage, and database and networking. So AWS owns making sure that is secure and that we are employing the right security techniques and practices around that part of that model. And then as a customer, you really have responsibility for that top half. So you own configuration of your security in the cloud. So that could be involved, taking advantage of specific AWS security configurations that we've made available to you for various services you're using, but also you defining what your network topology looks like, as we talked about. What kind of encryption are you going to put as far as your data that you're moving around the network? You get full access to the operating systems you're running. So how are you going to harden those operating systems? How are you going to control access to those operating systems? What kinds of firewalls are you going to put in place, either at the operating system level or even network-based firewalls? You're going to install an application or a workload on top of AWS, so it's your responsibility to make sure you actually are controlling access to that and knowing who has what responsibilities within that application. And finally, you're storing your content, and so customers own their content on AWS. So you are responsible for knowing where you're storing that, how you're storing it, how you're encrypting it, and who has access to all that content. So it's a joint effort. here, we take away a lot of the undifferentiated heavy lifting and let your security professionals kind of focus on that and let you implement what you want. And once again, that whole process allows you to implement the partner solutions that you feel fit your needs best, because as part of that shared responsibility model, you get to implement what you want to be able to, have the right security profiles and controls for what you're doing on AWS.
Yeah, definitely great points, because a lot of what's above the line is really dependent on what kind of software-defined infrastructure the customers are deploying, right? I mean, what does your applications architecture look like? What kind of infrastructure do you have? So it's really something that the customer has control over the infrastructure side, so they have to take ownership of the security side as well.
Yes.
Right? So excellent points. So Reza, let's kind of jump into the Pacific Life story. Okay, can you describe what your team at PacLife does, and tell us a little bit about your journey to AWS? Right? How did you think about it? Why, and what is the timeline?
So a little bit about our team. I manage the security and monitoring team within the Retirement Solutions Division of Pacific Life. Additionally, I manage what we call the Service Transformation Group, which is the group that's kind of responsible for delivering new capabilities to our technology organization and for the business. So we're kind of the ones forward-looking and thinking about what's kind of coming over the hill. And then once things become operationalized, we turn them over. Going to Amazon was kind of a matter of it just made good business sense for us. We operate a data center right now in our facility in Newport Beach, California, which is not the cheapest place to run a data center. Additionally, as we had our company has begun to do some expansions and growth, and we're bringing in new capabilities for technology, we realized that we need to be in an environment that's much more dynamic and more flexible. In particular, one of the big use cases that was a driver for us was our grid computing environment. So as a life insurance company, we do a lot of complex mathematics to figure out our rate tables and people's life expectancies and things like that. And so we needed an environment that we could spin up a couple thousand compute nodes to run some math algorithms against, get the results, and be gone with it. So Amazon made good sense for us for those kind of use cases, for sure.
Awesome. And you also talked about how that was a fairly elastic kind of workload, right? You have kind of a small footprint of machines that are always on, and then you have high variability in terms of requiring either spot instances or bursting to a large footprint.
Exactly. Yeah, these are something that we might run one or two operations a week on. So to have a multi-million-dollar investment in hardware that we have to remake every 3 to 5 years, when you start doing the math on it, it makes real quick sense that that's a perfect example of a good cloud-ready workload.
Got it. Okay. Now, how big is your footprint now on Amazon, on AWS?
So currently we have just about 100 instances running within our environment. We're looking to really ramp that up in the next couple of years as we move our disaster recovery environment into Amazon. So that'll be our target for that. So we expect to see that number get closer to 300 to 400 in the next year. And then again, our grid environment, when we have that operational, surges us up well over 2,000 nodes at a time. So
wow. Okay. That is definitely where kind of a public cloud like Amazon, AWS shines, right? Where you need a kind of rapid scale up for specific operations and then tear down, kind of going up, coming down, elasticity in your environment.
Exactly.
So for a leading financial services company like Pacific Life that's been around for over 125 years, I'm sure that there was kind of an internal process to determine this journey, right? Figure out if and when to move to the public cloud. So what was that internal decision and approval process like for you? Now, when you proposed that we should go to Amazon, AWS, what was that internal decision process like?
I got to tell you, this process started before I even joined the company. So I've been with Pacific Life for about 1.5 years now, and I believe they started these discussions back in 2011. And we didn't actually get a workload, a true no-kidding workload in Amazon until closer to 2015. The company's very risk adverse. It takes a lot of comfort to get them to say, hey, maybe this is something we can do. Because nobody, in a 148-year-old company, nobody wants to be the one who makes a decision that sinks it, right? There's a lot of pressure, a lot of legacy, and also, more importantly, there's a lot of our customers that have placed their trust, their life plans in our hands. So we want to make sure that we're being respectful and responsible with the financial decisions they've made to be with us.
Yeah, for good reason. There are a lot of safeguards and processes to make sure that any such big move is actually well thought out and well planned and so on, right? So how much of that conversation or decision focused on security?
That was a huge portion. I mean, people got the financial sense, people got the scalability and elasticity after some time, but security, oh, well, there's this compliance problem. How do we monitor this? How do we look at that? And how are people going to be trained to deal with the information that we're getting in there? It's going to, there's a lot of, 1,000 reasons why not to that were thrown out there. So for me coming in as the new security manager, that was my biggest challenge on day one, was to figure out how can I give the senior leadership and the board that confidence and that comfort level that, hey, we can operate in the cloud, and not only can we operate in the cloud securely, I would wager that we can operate even more secure there than we can in our own data centers. That was a bold statement to make.
That is a bold statement, and definitely one that is justified, because again, AWS has become so secure as far as physical infrastructure. They take their share of the shared responsibility model very seriously, and the tools that you have within the AWS environment. We're going to get into this a little bit more, but Amazon AWS has been building out the tool set that customers can use to manage security in their environments, and now there's a very robust set of tools and APIs that are available for you to use. So we'll get into that a bit. But after the initial approval process, what was the planning like? If you wanted to go from your VMware environment on-prem to AWS and do that in a secure way, can you talk about what kind of training was required, what kind of internal onboarding, education was required for your team to be able to execute this move?
So two major themes kind of emerge there. The first is what kind of data are you working with? In the on-prem environment, you take for granted the types of information and data that are on your systems, because it's in a data center, it's protected equivalently for everything. So going to the cloud, you now have some design considerations to think about. And so knowing if you have confidential information or maybe something that's restricted by, SOX regulations or things like that, you want to make sure you understand the requirements for security around that data classification, and make sure that your design pattern in Amazon takes those into account. And perhaps you need to use something like the key management service to do encrypted EC2 volumes, or a lot of different things you got to think about there. The second thing was making sure that we had the requirement was to at least have the minimum level of visibility that we do get on-prem. So can we at least get logs in? Can we get flow, complete that picture, and our monitoring teams can actually make sense of it. So those were kind of the two big challenges that kind of pops.
Got it. Yes, I think you broke up a little bit there, but that makes sense. I think getting at least parity from a visibility perspective and logging perspective that you had on-prem was definitely one of the requirements, right?
Yeah.
So that you're not losing functionality from a security perspective when you go to the cloud. Now, which AWS tools and services do you use from a security perspective? Right? I mean, Scott talked about CloudTrail. He talked about Vpc Flowlog. What do you guys use at Pacific Life? There's a lot of tools.
Yeah, CloudTrail is a huge component of ours that we use, and the flow logs. Currently, what we do, because we have a managed security provider who does analysis of all of our security events. So one of the challenges we had was to take all this AWS information, and there, as Scott mentioned, there is a lot of information that you can pull out of there, and make sure that we could actually get that into our Splunk environment, so that our managed security provider could do their analysis that we asked them to do. And so we use S3 as kind of a meet-me point where we can now just barf all this data into a centralized bucket that Splunk can then come through and scrape back out. And part of that, we had to make sure we had some permissions and controls placed on that bucket because, one, we wanted that data to be secure, and two, we wanted to make sure that the data was not able to be modified. So we had to do a lot of permissions trickery to kind of make sure that we had a safe spot that, for auditability reasons, met the muster.
Yeah. How about encryption? Do you guys do encryption right now?
Yeah, we use the KMS service from Amazon. I mean, it's super integrated to anything you want to do there. They're always adding new areas that you can leverage it on. And to have a key management solution that literally is $1 a key per month, I mean, you can't beat it. To get that level of hit a checkbox when you launch something security, that was fantastic for us.
Fascinating, yeah. So you talked about CloudTrail, permissions and controls, making sure that you've got IAM set up properly so that access to the S3 buckets is restricted. You have, essentially like write once, read many, like worm access to the S3 buckets so that people are not changing the data that's been written. And then you talked about KMS and encryption, which again are the pillars when you think about security. Make sure that data is encrypted, make sure that you're using IAM effectively. A lot of people need to understand that, after all the other security measures are done, the role of IAM in the public cloud is it serves as the last perimeter, right? The final perimeter in your defense on the cloud is making sure that you have identity and access management set correctly. You're using users, groups, roles, and assigning permissions only to groups and roles. All of that, just best practices around IAM, because that is really going to make sure that you have that final perimeter.
Definitely.
Right. Now, having gone through this deployment successfully, and you're now on the cloud, you've been on the cloud for a couple of years, what would your guidance be for people who are getting started? What are the things that you think are must-dos, and what are the watch-outs, right? Things that you think people can get tripped up on and should pay attention to?
So, from my perspective, you want to encourage trying things. Our company has this idea that we have to create these large programmatic structures and processes. And look, the cloud's going to be new territory for your teams. Don't be afraid to get out there and do some test loads, do some development loads. It doesn't have to be a public-facing master or whatever, but the faster you get your engineers and your architects into Amazon and experimenting in a meaningful way, the better, because they're going to learn those gotchas, and you're going to increase your adoption rate. That was one of the big mistakes that we made, was trying to build too many guardrails around it before letting people get in. A good example of that is our enterprise cloud program has probably close to 30 officers and directors involved in, and we only have 3 AWS certified engineers. That's a bad ratio.
Yeah.
So
I can see that.
Definitely that's a big one. The second thing to consider is, Amazon's got a lot of offerings built in natively, but finding the right third-party tools to work with and integrate that maybe abstract that into a more easily to digest format is key too. And there's a lot of things out there, so go in the marketplace, play around, find the things that you're interested in, and really find those things to enable you.
That's again, it's an important one that a lot of people just getting started on AWS, they are focused on at least getting started. They've not thought about the ecosystem yet, but Amazon again has been a fantastic ecosystem builder when it comes to tools and third-party solutions that can be working in conjunction with what AWS offers, right? So kind of working hand in hand between the core Amazon functionality, AWS functionality, and what partners provide. So great point. And coming to your point about too many controls and the need for agility, I think this is a constant battle that a lot of organizations face, because on the one hand, you want to be fast, you want to get things going, you want to be agile, but you also want to be secure. And very often, security comes at the expense of agility, and that, for many people, is a big no-no. Like, where do you draw the line? And I think finding that happy medium between being secure and doing it fast enough that you can still, experiment and try things out, because you're looking at other objectives in moving to the cloud as well. It's about, getting agility, being able to have API-driven infrastructure, being able to kind of switch the model up, have a more DevOps kind of environment that allows you to push out changes very quickly and all of that. And that, if you have security that's going to be a roadblock, then that becomes a constant point of friction for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would actually say we kind of even preach that as kind of moving from the move fast or stay secure to the move fast and stay secure model.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point, Scott. Yeah, I mean you have to figure out how you kind of strike that balance between agility and security.
Yep.
So Scott, do you have any questions for Reza around kind of this initial deployment and what does the environment look like before we move on to some of the challenges and how he solves for security now? His broader toolkit.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. So obviously you found the things that give you the visibility that you have on your platform. Are there any things that like maybe you were able to fill a gap that you've never been able to fill before, as far as the amount of visibility or the level of detail that you were able to get out of a cloud environment that just was like not possible in your data center environment?
Well, I think a big thing is the amount of data that we're able to ingest from Amazon that's kind of native is super, super important. On-prem, our Splunk environment, because of the cost of Splunk ingestion for logs, we actually tune down a lot of our logs and restrict what we capture, but we don't have that same limitation within Amazon from a cost perspective for us, so we're actually able to capture more, which is actually letting some of our other analytics tools like user behavior analytics have more data points to measure off
Okay.
of what our user activity is in Amazon than we are getting on-prem. So that was one area that we definitely saw more. Secondly, we're doing a lot more on the host in terms of protection. In our data center today on-prem, we have our traditional defense in depth, and we have our IPS and our firewalls and things like that. And sometimes it's more difficult to correlate the activity happening at that perimeter with the activity on the host. In Amazon, we've chosen the route of doing more of the host-based security layering. So we're using host-based intrusion protection in DLP and filtering using Trend Micro, which that's been really helpful for us to now get much more information specifically on our individual host than we do get today on-prem.
Cool. And I like the the whole encouraging people to try things. It's one of my favorite things about the cloud is that you can go and try stuff, and when you're done, you throw it away, and you're done paying for it. I know it's still early days for you guys, but have you found that maybe people have been able to experiment or try new things that they just haven't been able to do because it might have been cost prohibitive or there wasn't infrastructure in the data center, that some new innovations being unlocked?
We're doing a lot more with our web infrastructure redevelopment. We've been trying to modernize that for quite some time. We have a very legacy web platform on-prem, and they weren't really sure exactly what features they wanted to use and what tools they place on most of these features. They were able to do it for a third of a cent an hour to try it out and go, oh, I don't really like that, I'm going to do something else. Whereas in the past, we would have had to, either A, try to get the vendor to give us a free trial, or maybe purchase a license that turns into throwaway, and go through all the process of that. So they've been able to experiment with 10 or 15 different products in a week, whereas it would have taken us, a couple of weeks to get through contracting on-prem. So definitely has helped speed up the ability to test and try.
Cool. Yes, it's one of my favorite value props. That's great.
Awesome. Now there are a couple of attendee questions that have come in that I think are a great segue to the next part of the conversation, right? So, first one question to Reza: what security challenges, after having moved to AWS, what are some of the security what are the changes in security behavior that is required? So the question was around what security challenges you faced after migrating to AWS, but I think it's really about how has your kind of security concerns shifted after moving to AWS? What are the things that required you to kind of think about security differently?
Well, we had to really think about the things that we normally take for granted, and particularly like making sure that workloads are encrypted where the data is sensitive. That was definitely a big learning curve. When I had to go to my different teams and tell them we need to encrypt this, it was, whoa, how come I have to do that? I don't have to do that today. I'm not, my app's not designed for that. I'm like, look, it's something that we have. You know, you're dealing with confidential data. We're going to have to do some work on there. I think another thing that was kind of a shift was the way we approach that defense in depth, getting away from the traditional network layers and focusing on having those same layers present, but doing it on the host level. Our enterprise security team from our corporate side, you know, that was a good 6-month conversation to get them to kind of be able to just visualize it in their head. And so I think you end up having to spend more time being a cloud security evangelist than doing the actual cloud security work itself, because really you're trying to sell and win the hearts and minds of people that just don't see it yet. They're not sure how to touch it. So I don't know if I.
So what made you look for a solution like Dome9 in the AWS marketplace? So by the way, just a quick intro to Dome9. Dome9 is a cloud security orchestration and automation platform. We work with AWS capabilities. So we basically use the AWS APIs but then give you visibility and control with orchestration built on top of that. So if you have a growing cloud environment and you want to get visibility and control, Dome9 gives you a SaaS platform that lets you do that. So Reza, what made you look for that kind of solution?
So the two things Dome9 and was the fact that we were able to get our security groups under tight management. That was an area that when we were testing in Amazon, sure, it's fine and easy for a couple of workloads to manually manage your security groups, but as we started more complex, trying to piece together and visualize in your mind how all of these groups tie together and how they work across different regions and all these different other things, it gets really complicated, especially when you have a security team that's not, you know, my team weren't security developers, so they, you know, looking at the command line output wasn't going to work for them. We needed something that could kind of tie it all together and give them a single pane. So Dome9 was fantastic with that part. Giving us that visibility was huge, particularly the Clarity tool, which is a security group visualization tool in Dome9 that actually will show you how all these different security groups chain together and how, you know, maybe a workload that's not supposed to be public potentially could be exposed through, you know, a misapplication of security groups. So to have that kind of insight and was big for us. And the second part of that, then having that visibility and that we could give our senior leadership the confidence that we could operate securely. And ultimately, confidence is one of those big things that really will make or break your cloud move.
Sure. Yeah. So it's visibility. It's actually knowing where your assets are, having complete control of cloud footprint from a security perspective as it grows. Right.
Yep.
Now, there was a couple of questions that come in that I think are very relevant and great questions. So how do the skills of security people change on your team? Can security people just operate the tools and panes of glass, or is it mandatory to add scripting and programming to the skill sets to support security automation? And I think that comes to the point you're just making right now. So you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So in short, people are going to have to learn to be developers. There's no way around it. Amazon. I'm actually at a DevOps conference this week. Everything is turning into code and is being consumed that way. And Dome9, it definitely is a very helpful bridge to pull all these pieces together. But even Dome9, I think, has a really robust API capability, which means that you can actually do a lot of these manual things that you're clicking through on the screen, you can now start doing through API call, which when you start getting into accelerating the ability to move workloads out, that's going to be key. And your security team has to be able to basically develop security code products that the developers and the ops teams in your organizations are going to leverage. So it does shift quite a bit. We're no longer going to be able to just get by clicking through interfaces, and I'll tell you, it's a big challenge for me. I have a team that's really smart, very capable, and I'm basically asking them to learn new tricks. And when I'm now hiring new people on, coding experience is now one of my mandatory requirements.
Wonderful. That is almost a change that is coming across the board in infrastructure, right? More and more API-based automated processes for both deployment and maintenance, and a lot of this stuff is being automated, right? Because you're also talking about very fast-moving, agile, elastic environments where things are changing a lot. They're relying on humans to actually go and deploy things securely. Doing it on a repeated basis multiple times a day can be a challenge. So really automating is the way to go there.
Yep.
Great. So now one last question before I kind of open it up to the next piece. Just what does your security stack look like today? So what tools did you bring with you from your on-prem environment? What new tools did you need? You don't have to name vendors, but talk about just the types of tools, right? Antivirus or host firewall. What are the tools that you kind of brought along with you that survived that transition from on-prem to the cloud? And what new tools did you have to go and invest?
So from a functionality perspective, almost every major defense and dev functionality survived. We do have firewall, we do have intrusion protection, we do have DLP, we do have web content filtering. The major thing that shifted, though, is the way we deliver that. And a big services are not happening on separate devices, but are now happening on the host level. In Amazon, that makes a lot of sense, especially when you start talking about elastic workloads that need to expand and contract. Traditionally, some of the firewall vendors have basically just taken their software and ported it to run on EC2, which you might have a case for that, but know that it does come with a price that the elasticity that you're looking for may not be as robust in those platforms, and some of the other features that you know and expect on-prem, like stateful failover, doesn't always work so well on Amazon, particularly because you're blocking multicast and other traffic between the instances. So it does create limitations where your traditional tool sets may not work in the cloud. But that said, it's not that you don't have those features.
Got it. So same kinds of functionality, but different implementations, essentially, right? Different way of actually providing that functionality.
And that will be one of the toughest conversations you have with your security teams, is because they're going to pick up their firewall and go, okay, where do I stick this? And I'm like,
yeah. The firewall is definitely one very interesting one, because there's so much reliance on kind of the gateway firewall in your data center, right? You kind of clearly demarcate what is your trusted environment and what is kind of the untrusted, right? So there's a clear perimeter, and in the cloud, all it takes is adding one port access in your security group, and now all of a sudden your database server is kind of sitting on the perimeter, right? Because you can have someone who is trying to access it directly. And so the perimeter in the cloud environment is so fluid and flexible that we have actually seen this in customer environments. Like when you go and look at what they've set up, you have a firewall in the cloud, which is good, but then the instances and the security groups that are supposed to be private and sitting behind the firewall are actually sitting right next to it, right? So they're kind of sitting adjacent to it rather than behind the firewall, because someone had decided to open up a port in that security group, right? And that is really just a software change that leaves people kind of vulnerable, because they rely on that firewall so much. And I think, to your point, thinking about it in layers and defensive depth is really how you have to do it. The layered approach. Gartner talks about this all the time, right? Where you have to talk about kind of the foundational components, the processes, making sure that you have all the required processes, then making sure that your network topology is exactly as you want it. You're doing microsegmentation and so on. Then talking about encryption, talking about finally, things like antivirus as well. But having all these different layers in your security is kind of key.
Definitely.
Now, Scott, same question back to you. When AWS customers are migrating a workload, So, they're going from taking a workload that was deployed in their data center, moving it to the cloud. Which parts of security can be lifted and shifted, and which parts need to be rethought?
Sure. So, we already talked about kind of the firewalls and the intrusion detection. So, I mean, you can still bring your firewall with you. As Reza mentioned, there are some limitations to those firewalls. I work with some of those partners today, and obviously we're working to help them improve. But you can bring them with you to an extent. You can bring your intrusion detection in many cases with you. You mentioned the Trend Micro that runs right on the EC2 instance, so it kind of flexes up and down with you. You bring your SIM with you. Mentioned Splunk or some of the other ones. Those things you can continue to bring with you and leverage. But the big thing that needs to be rethought is the fact that everything in AWS is API based, and in some cases you interact with these services purely via an API. There's no piece of infrastructure for you, and that's where a firewall is only going to give you so much protection. But if you're using something like Dynamodb or S3, the interactions with those are purely through an API, and a firewall is never going to detect that information or what's happening. So this is where something like a CloudTrail really comes in, and this is where you have to rethink that you have to examine and understand the entire perimeter and everything that you can track or need to track, so that that you're giving the people the flexibility to use the tools that are going to help the business, but that you have the right level of control. And so, understanding that and paying attention to that larger collection of things you need to track, as well as, taking the time to, once again, focus on IAM. Identity and access management is where you're going to create the policies that determine what people can do in your account, and that you're going to have to invest the time in that. And this is a completely different thing than maybe you're doing in your on-premise environment today, so that you're going through and you're actually saying these are the people that need to be able to execute these APIs and these actions, and practicing really a least privilege access model around what people can do in your accounts are things that are going to have to be rethought when you're coming to AWS and beginning to build your workloads and practices.
Yeah, and I don't want to beat up the point about IAM, but it is worth repeating that for exactly this reason, you have API access to, a lot of the access to your cloud environment is via API. Amazon AWS has been building out the built-in components, right? You have databases, you have NoSQL databases, you have data warehouses, you have, functional programming, function as a service, right? You have AWS Lambda, where, a lot of the network security and firewall mechanisms just don't even find, any kind of access to these things. And that is really where using IAM effectively becomes so important, so much more so than even your data center, because IAM in an AWS environment, you have to understand and use IAM as AWS provides it, because it is so powerful, right? Yeah. And it allows you to go and do things that protect things like this, access to your Dynamodb, S3 buckets, access to IAM. All of this can be managed effectively, right? So that is important, and CloudTrail, like you said, right, really understand what's going on.
Yep.
So there was a question that came in. Does Dome9 actively make changes in the network firewall infrastructure? So Reza, I'll let you answer it, and then I can jump in with some comments as well. Reza, you there?
Sorry, I had mute on.
No
So Dome9 basically manages the AWS security groups, which essentially is your firewalls within Amazon. It's provide that stateful packet and that stateful packet flow, and what you're allowing in and out and all that. Dome9, you can actually do all of that work through the Dome9 console instead of going in through Amazon, which does have some advantages in terms of the way you can kind of manage it and piece it together. Additionally, a cool feature if you're looking to create separation of duties is that you can actually restrict, Dome9 can actually do what they call a lock, a region lock, which means that when you put a security group in Dome9, it's authoritative. So if one of your sysops guys goes into Amazon and manually changes a security group to be something that's not what you've said is the correct rule, Dome9 will actually come back in and change it back to what it's supposed to be, and so it'll maintain that gold standard. So that's been helpful to make sure that we don't have, the system administrators trying to, pull a fast one on us. So it's been a cool use case for that. So yeah, definitely you can manage all of that through Dome9.
Awesome, thank you. So Dome9 offers two modes of operation when it comes to network security. Right? One is called read-only mode, which is basically we allow you to see what's going on, detect misconfigurations, and find out like visualization, understanding, giving you a searchable interface for all your security policies so that you can find things easily, right? So it is finding, monitoring, and all of that. We have something called full control mode, which is really where Dome9 actively makes changes in your network security posture on your behalf, right? And this is the more advanced mode. This is really where a lot of customers find value because now it becomes your security console for making sure that you've got things configured correctly. And if you find something from a security group configuration perspective that is not what you wanted, using the Dome9 tool itself, you can go and fix it. So that is the full protection mode. And it also gives you things like sample protection and region lock that Reza just talked about.
Yeah.
So let's quickly switch gears. I know we have just 10 minutes more. I do want to talk about compliance because Reza, Pacific Life, I'm sure, has very strict regulatory requirements and also kind of internal IT governance needs, right, which your organization has to go and make sure that you enforce. So can you talk about this? What are some of the requirements that you have from a compliance and governance perspective?
So the two biggest compliance aspects that have a big impact, well, three big ones, is the SOX requirements, so Sarbanes-Oxley. We also have a lot of the New York Department of Financial Services as well as the Department of Insurance on some of the different state levels. Those are some of the big requirements or regimes we have to do. Fortunately, a lot of those requirements kind of blur together, but being able to create on-demand compliance reports to present to auditors when we're asked for them is very important. That's one of our biggest challenges that we have on-prem today, and that there's a lot of manual effort, and I got to use 4 or 5 different tools to piece it together. Then someone has to massage that data into a single report and get it presentable. One of the in the compliance engine where I can actually run on-demand reports of my Amazon environment in minutes, and I can do that for SOX. I can do it for PCI if I need to. I can also do some of the best practice searches as well as the Center for Internet Security, AWS best security standards as well. Additionally, you can create some customized ones too. So if I want to if I have something coming from New York Department of Financial Services, I can actually create a audit check in there that I can then run against my stuff as well. So it's important to have that on demand when you want it.
Looks like you're on mute, Suda.
All right, I'm on mute. So that was one of the questions that I was going to ask you is what's different between what you had been doing on-prem and in the cloud? And your point is, first of all, a lot more automation where you used to have manual processes. Now there is just a lot more automated information gathering, a lot more automated assessment that is possible in the public cloud.
Definitely, yeah. The API, having everything being API centric, as you mentioned earlier, it's a game changer. I mean, really, a lot of things that took us a long time to do in security are now more readily accessible. The challenge then is either having the right tools or the right API skills to get that information and make it usable. So I think Dome9 does a great job of kind of packaging that together and giving you really robust access in an easy to work with way for your teams that are making that transition.
Got it. Okay. Now, let's, before I jump to that, so tell me a little bit about what your roadmap looks like on AWS. You hinted at it in the beginning where you said you wanted to expand your footprint, but what do you see your environment looking like a year to 3 from now?
So in the next year, we're going to have all of our disaster recovery workloads as well as all of our web properties running in Amazon. So the web properties, we're already in process of moving that up. As well as the disaster recovery we're looking to have done by the end of 2018. So it's an aggressive timeline for us, but I think we're at that stage now where I think we have the competencies to do that now. In the next 3 to 5 years, we have a stated goal of having our entire data center within Amazon. So actually, the only thing we'll have running our data center is maybe like a print server, a couple of domain controllers, and some things like that. maybe some local storage for desktop users. But by and large, we want to make sure that we're getting out of the data center business and focusing on the things that are more business differentiating for us.
That's awesome. So going from on-prem to no-prem, effectively.
Exactly. Now, we do have one thing that we have to keep in mind is our mainframe. That's kind of our boat anchor. So we'll have that. We'll have some presence in that somewhere. But it could come a time where maybe that mainframe actually sits in a colo next to one of the availability zones. That's definitely where we're kind of looking for long term.
Yeah. Okay. Now again, before we go to this, Scott, can you give us a quick summary of some of the cool things that have come out of AWS from a security perspective just in the last 6 months? What's new that people should try out to check out?
Sure. And there's certainly a fair amount of things, and as people have probably noticed, there's a lot of features and functions that AWS puts out throughout the year. At the top of the list, I'd put as my favorite one is that you can now take an IAM role that you want to attach to an EC2 instance to govern what that EC2 instance can call API-wise. You can actually attach it to a running EC2 instance. So since I've been at AWS, you've never been able to do that, and I can't tell you how many times I've launched an instance and realized I forgot to attach the role and had to terminate it and attach it again. So it gives you over those humps, but the cool thing that it also offers is you now have this ability to temporarily add permissions to an EC2 instance, maybe when it first boots up, so it can do a few things to configure itself, and then remove that role, so you minimize the access that EC2 instance has for that. So you can kind of add and take that away as needed, and I think that's a really cool additional security feature as well. Another big one is AWS Organizations, which we announced originally at reInvent, which it went GA in February, and it allows you to have the ability to manage multiple accounts and the configuration against those accounts from one central place. I think it's really going to be a big thing for, as we see these, larger companies either come in or grow, like Pacific Life, to have the ability to have multiple accounts for multiple parts of the business and multiple teams while still having the ability to centrally manage the control around those accounts. So I think that's a really cool one. We're still seeing various services who are integrating with CloudTrail, so you have more of that visibility. We announced this new SDK for Python. So we've had an SDK for encryption for Java, and we announced one for Python as well. And basically, that allows developers to implement functionality to be able to correctly generate and manage keys within their application without having to deal with some of the kind of low-level complexities that go around that, so they can more focus on building their applications. So I think, that's a cool one that'll be out there. And we've announced what we call VPC Endpoints for Dynamodb, which allows you to actually be able to make DynamoDB calls within your VPC against a private endpoint, as opposed to reaching out to the public internet to make some of those calls. So there's lots of other things, but those are certainly some of the highlights that I would bring up as far as some of the cool things that we've done around security, within the AWS environment in the last 6 months or so.
Awesome. I'm always impressed by the velocity with which Amazon continues to innovate, Scott, because you've already got a big head start when it comes to just security capabilities in the platform. And every time I look at kind of the security news, there is just a whole bunch of new things to try out. So it's fascinating. It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Scott and Reza. I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about what Dome9 does for those of you who've not seen Dome9. So Dome9, as I mentioned, is a SaaS platform that allows you to manage and orchestrate security, compliance, and governance across public cloud infrastructure environments. So we focus on IaaS security. A lot of our core strength and core DNA comes from the network security realm. So we allow you to manage your security groups, VPCs, accounts, make sure you're setting the right policies, make sure you have visibility across your entire AWS footprint, right, across different accounts, regions. Know what's going on, know which of your assets are sitting on the perimeter, what level of vulnerability each of them has, right? So network security, but also being able to manage this proactively. So going and fixing it, putting in place kind of the lockdown mechanism, right, what we call tamper protection, so that people are not making changes to your cloud environment outside of your control, okay? That is one of the core functionalities. The second one is that it's more than just about the network. It's about being able to manage compliance, governance, understanding what your password policies are. So Dome9 has an automated compliance engine that is built into the platform, allows you to go and look at how compliant you are against PCI DSS, against the AWS CIS benchmarks that Reza just talked about, and so on, right? So compliance, and also you can go and create your own custom rules. So we have a very simple and unique way for you to go and create and document your IT governance requirements in terms of tagging, in terms of password policies, so on. So you can create your own rules if your organization has internal governance requirements, and then go and automatically assess how you are doing from a compliance and governance perspective. And finally, on the IAM side, we have some very cool capabilities that allow you to look at your IAM policies, effectively understand what your effective IAM policy is for each of your users, groups, and roles. And then we have a lockdown mechanism on IAM as well. Essentially, think of it like the super user sudo for the cloud, right? So if you have some specific actions that you require elevation for, we have something called IAM safety that allows you to put a firewall on your IAM mechanism. So this is Dome9. You can come check us out, dome9.com. Check out what we have, and you can sign up for a free trial, and we can walk you through what the platform offers. So thank you for joining us. These are our email addresses if you want to reach out to us. Appreciate it. Reza and Scott, thank you for spending the hour with us. This was a great session.
Thank you very much. It was a great time. Thanks, everybody.
Definitely welcome. Thank you.